Do you remember the last time you've been to a botanical garden? And probably also why you visited? Why do we have botanical gardens in almost all major cities in the world? What's their purpose from just being green, pretty, recreational? To find that out, I'm visiting the Botanical Garden in Sydney today, which is one of the most visited botanical gardens in the world. I'm meeting with Professor Maurizio Rosetto, who is the head of the Research Center for Ecosystem Resilience. Maurizio, botanical gardens are often seen as recreational places. As also our botanical garden here in Sydney is visited by many people every day. But I guess there are many more roles a botanical garden needs to fulfill. Can you tell us what these are?
Yes, and in fact, you're right. It is mainly seen as a recreational space, and it is one of the most visited botanic gardens in the world. But modern botanic gardens really fulfill many, many other roles. And probably the two most important ones are a scientific role and an educational role. So botanic gardens are not just random trees planted in a beautiful way. They actually include meaningful collections. So, for example, here we're in the rainforest collection. These are all plants from the Australian rainforest, including some threatened species and some species that are now pretty much found nowhere else. And so those collections are important because they really provide you an opportunity to see what this type of vegetation is. And this is important from an educational point of view, so that people really can experience those different environments, those different plants. But the education goes well beyond that. Modern botanic gardens such as ours have a whole lot of educational opportunities that are pended to schools, that are pended to adults, that are pended to tourists. And then there is the scientific component, which is what I'm part of. So modern botanic gardens include a whole set of different scientific interests and scientific research. Many botanic gardens, for example, have herbaria as part of their institutions, such as ours. Herbarias are collections of specimens representative of the flora of Australia, of New South Wales and Australia. And I think you already had a previous segment on that. But in this particular botanic gardens here in Sydney, we also have other areas of research that we're interested in. So my team, for example, does a lot of research in evolutionary ecology. We have a lot of systematic taxonomic research, so learning what the plants are and how they are related. We have seed research, we have plant pathology research. So really modern botanic gardens fulfill many, many different roles beyond that of providing open space in the city.
Talking about the science, can you share a specific scientific project currently being conducted at the Botanical Gardens here in Sydney?
So we do many, many different things, as I just mentioned before, but maybe one that integrates all the different areas of science is the work that we do on threatened species. So we do a lot of work in trying to provide guidance and support to the management and conservation of threatened flora. As you know, in Australia and New South Wales, we have many, many threatened species, and many of them are reduced to a few hundred individuals, if not even less, and reduced to very, very small fragmented populations. And so we can integrate all the research that we do to try to support those species. So for example, my team, the Research Center for Ecosystem Resilience, does a lot of genetic works, conservation genetic works, to ensure that species are managed in a sustainable way. The seed bank team does a lot of work on managing seeds, germinating seeds, and keeping seeds. The horticultural teams might grow plants that will then be translocated back in the wild. And the plant pathology team might work on diseases such as myrtle rust and Phytophthora. So we can really provide that integrated approach that benefits threatened species management in general.
Yeah. Could you expand perhaps a bit on why genetics are useful for understanding species populations?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And as I said, within the Research Center for Ecosystem Resilience, we really focus on integrating genetic knowledge into the management of our flora. And, and, and understanding genetics is really crucial for many, many different reasons. First of all, genetics are a tool that helps us learn not only about the evolution of species, but about their ecology, their dynamics across the landscape, the relatedness of species and individuals. But in a conservation context, genetic diversity is really important for two main reasons. The first one is the short-term reason. If populations are small, they usually are not diverse, and as a result, the individuals within that population will be closely related. If those individuals are closely related, then you will have what we know as inbreeding, and as a consequence, a whole lot of deleterious part of your genome are expressed in greatest frequency, and the fitness of the population declines. And usually that is demonstrated by a loss of fertility. So we have a lot of threatened species that are reduced to a single small population that do not produce viable seed, for example. And the reason is that they've got too little genetic diversity. So that's the short-term reason. Inbreeding and potentially inbreeding depression that can reduce fitness. The second reason is a wide population level genetic spectrum means that you have more variation of every single gene, and so you are more likely to be resilient and adaptable to change. So a small population, for example, might not have any genes that will help it survive and resist a new disease. You know, we have myrtle rust as an example coming now that is impacting a lot of small population of species from the family Myrtaceae. They are small, they have low diversity, they don't have the genes that help them survive those myrtle rusts, and they're suddenly risking being threatened from extinction. So those are the two components. In the short term, genetic diversity increases fitness. In the long term, it increases adaptability.
Coming back to the botanical gardens, what is your outlook on the challenges botanical gardens will face in the future?
That's a great question. As I was mentioning before, modern botanic gardens really have to be more than simple spaces for people to go and enjoy their lunch. And so we have to be more relevant not only from a scientific and a collection point of view, but more relevant in many different areas. The issues for all botanic gardens, at least in Australia, is usually the funds can be quite limited, so being able to maintain the work that we do can be difficult, but of course the challenges that we can deal with. And also then there are different type of challenges that we need to consider, the more environmental type challenges. A lot of these gardens are set within a specific environment and a specific climate, and changing climates can really have an impact. And a lot of botanic gardens are already forward thinking and already thinking about long-term planting strategies that will suit the changing climates.
Do you have a general advice for early career researchers interested in botanical sciences?
That's a really excellent question, because I think now it becomes harder for students to think about this type of career, because a lot of the university courses seem to be very targeted, and so it's difficult for people to think as botanic gardens as potential career path. But in general, I would say follow your passion. Make sure that you have a broad understanding of the type of issues that we deal with, so ecology, genetics, botany, obviously. But don't consider the lack of knowledge of any of those specific areas as a limiting factor. What really matters is your passion. If you're really passionate about it, if you're really interested about the type of work that we do, come and talk to us, and certainly we can guide you through your studies and your postgraduate studies towards a possible career. Definitely, as far as postgraduate study, I would say honors, PhD are pretty important, and that's when you really have to decide what you want to do
Maurizio, do you have a favorite botanical garden?
Do I have a favorite? Sydney, of course. If I have to think, aside from Sydney, probably of the ones that I've visited, and I've seen quite a few, Kirstenbosch in Cape Town is incredibly spectacular. And one that really surprised me for the collections and how pretty it was, despite the fact it was quite small, was Palermo in Sicily. A really, really lovely little botanic garden.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.